Hey, how you doing, everyone? Welcome back to the Chairman of the Board podcast. My name is Michael, the chairman, and my guest today is Chiara Burns, who is the founder of this new social media app that's gaining a lot of traction on TikTok called TAO Social, which is a decentralized, it's going to be the first one, right? The first decentralized social media platform where it's going to be fully run. The goal, right, is to be fully run by the people who are the consumers of the product.
Yeah, it's pretty unique in that regard. There's, of course, other social media platforms that are decentralized in some way, shape, or form, but it's usually their technology. So whether they're building on, not to get too technical, but like the Fediverse or AT protocol or whatever the case might be. And it's a good first step, that decentralization of tech. But it's what we're doing differently is the decentralization of control. And so putting power back in the hands of the users by ensuring that the app belongs to them as opposed to the shareholders and the founders.
All right, cool. And your aim is to make the app unfuckwithable, right?
Mm. Yes.
Right. So, and immune to corruption from corporate, political, and government agendas and any form of censorship, as well as not being able to be sold off to like any billionaire. How have you structured TAO Social to achieve breaking the pattern of greed, exploitation, and censorship?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it is in essence a Wyoming DAO LLC. And the reason we went with an LLC, people are always like, why didn't you go with co-op? Part of it is because it's co-optable, co-op, surprisingly, because they have a board, but also because an LLC affords us maximum flexibility with what we can do with it down the line. The DAO part is to ensure that there's no shareholders or traditional ownership. And so decentralized autonomous organization, it's something that's typically on blockchain, and it's basically going to be every person on the platform has a token. So it's one-to-one, and it's what we call soul bound, meaning it can't be given away or traded or sold. It always remains with that person. So if you're a user on the platform, you have a soul bound token, and that is your voice in the community. And that ultimately is going to dictate the direction of the platform. Now, that you can obviously run into all kinds of issues. And so we're pulling in experts, legal experts, DAO experts, Web3 experts to talk about the best way to structure the DAO. But the way that we're going to ensure that it is unfuckwithable is
Hmm.
by eliminating equity and shareholding within the LLC, because you can do whatever you want pretty much with an LLC, unlike a co-op or something else. And then the DAO on top of it is the governance structure.
Okay. Interesting. And yeah, what really stood out to me about you is that your goal is, like, you talk a lot about how, and by the way, TAO, A stands for Together as One. And
Yeah.
you talk a lot about how, this world shouldn't be about left versus right, black versus white, all this, stupid shit. It's all of us, right? It's all of us versus a couple select people at the top trying to divide and conquer all of us. And that's really why I reached out to you. I'm like, that's my kind of philosophy too. And I think that's the new age we're moving into. This new age of, like you said, Web3
Mhm.
and the age of really harmony in our world. And we need more of that. And I think there's a lot more people in our generation. You're, I think, 30, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm 27. So I think in our generation, we are uh, more focused and aware of how everything hasn't worked in the past, and that the only real path forward is harmony. And a lot of our generation is, chaos and memes and stuff too, which is fun. But it's, I think people like you are really building the future with this philosophy, and it's greatly needed. So I appreciate you doing this. And um, anyone who else is working with you in your team to do this?
So, well, there's the actual team, and I also thank you for you just articulated all of that so well, the kind of paradigm shift that we're going through. And there's a whole ecosystem of us springing up on TikTok. And I want to, in case TikTok does go down, pull these people onto TAO, but people who are really focused on it could be called community wealth. It could be called a number of things, but it's this completely different way of approaching business and community. And it really is thinking of the well-being of the entire ecosystem. And so there's a creator on TikTok, Jay Friday, who is like a friendly of TAO. And so we've got these people who are running like mission adjacent, right? And she's got over 300 terms for that exact shift that you just alluded to between that old world paradigm of greed, exploitation, division, censorship into this kind of new era. And so it really is a whole movement that's starting to spring up right now. As for who's on our team, we're volunteer based for the most part, right? We have a program for deferred compensation. You legally do have to compensate people in some way, shape, or form for the time that they spend on the application. But because we're eliminating equity, we had to come up with something that was rather novel, which is deferred compensation. But we are volunteers. And our tech lead is Adam Young. You can find him on LinkedIn. He's been toddling around server rooms since he was 3 years old. He is pretty confident he knows how to reverse engineer the TikTok algorithm, which is one thing that I think gives us quite an advantage because he is so technically savvy. Just the fact that when you see what we're releasing for our MVP and that we did that in just a couple months, it's really a testament to his mind and his horsepower. And then we've got 3-4-ish devs working with us. Some of them don't want their names publicly shared because they have full-time jobs and there could be something, they just don't necessarily want it out there publicly at the moment. Our designer's a little more publicly facing. So we've got Mafe Perdomo, who's amazing. She's from Colombia. She's been here 4 years. And she and Xenia have been heading up the tech side. We have Katie Mead, who is our product and design lead. She spent time at consulting with Google, Waymo, Facebook, a number of others. And then we've got some people that kind of pop in and out on different projects, whether they're working on brand identity. We've got Matt Dearden in our legal corner. On TikTok, he's at Matt Dearden 49, and he is a business attorney. So we've got a lot of heavy hitters and also just scrappy startup people that are all very much mission aligned with what it is we're doing.
I think that's really cool, and the fact that it's starting out with volunteer based shows that it really is going into that new philosophy of, hey, we're doing this because it's the right thing to do, and not because we're greedy. And it's really the only like I was going to ask about this too, like it's only the sustainable way, really. Like I was going to ask you about our current system and why it's not sustainable, but really the only sustainable way is being doing the right thing. That's really the only way to actually keep us on the right track from not destroying ourselves, I think.
I completely agree. And I wouldn't say that I'm anti-capitalist. A lot of people are looking at TAO and the language I'm using. They're like, oh, she's socialist, she's communist, she's whatever. And really what it is we have created this system that crushes the people who actually produce the value to the point where they cannot live. And we have this huge gap, this discrepancy between the people who have the ownership and the power and the wealth and the people who don't. And it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable at all because the only possible outcome for that is a 2-tiered rent economy where you've got the people at the top, the BlackRock, Vanguards, billionaires who own everything and everyone else renting from them. And we've been told by people who are experts in systems and trends that this is the direction that the future is going. Like literally the World Economic Forum has come right out and told us that this is the future. And the only way to break out of that is for everyday people to stand shoulder to shoulder with their neighbors and say, we're not taking any part of that. We're going to build something different. And you're right. It's not just building different systems. It's building from a completely different paradigm of not stepping on people to get ahead, right? But ensuring that the whole ecosystem is provided for and taken care of.
Yeah, that's one of the questions I was going to ask you was, can you explain how our current system, the world, is set to collapse, including what is going on right now with private equity, the World Economic Forum's plan of you will own nothing and be happy, and artificial intelligence?
Yeah. So I'm not an expert in private equity by any stretch, but I can speak to the general kind of pattern of what we're seeing right now. So our existing systems are not sustainable because of the paradigm that they were built on. And so all around the world, we have financial systems that are built on debt. We have economies that are built on war. We have, in the US, a healthcare system that's built on keeping people sick because it's for profit. We've got a prison system built on keeping poor minorities incarcerated like it's a disaster. None of that is sustainable in the long term. It is cancerous. It is something that is cannibalistic, like it's eating itself alive. And we can look at these systems and realize that they're not sustainable and that there's going to be some kind of collapse. And it's been talked about, the Davos people and their ancillaries, what this could look like with our financial system. crashing, which could happen at some point. Very, very real possibility. And what's introduced instead, and this idea of like a central bank digital currency, right? They've had these conversations about what's going to happen. Years ago, they were talking about what it would look like for AI to replace the most human jobs. And people at the time didn't take it very seriously, right? But now with the job market frozen for the last 6 months to a year, we're like, oh, wait, this is very real because the corporations are going to be cutting their costs and increasing their margins. Anything that can be done by AI, they're going to have done by AI. And it only leads to one place. And so we know, like everyone knows, that our existing systems aren't sustainable. And from the ashes of this old world system, something new has to emerge. And the powers that be have a very specific idea for what they want that to look like. They've told us in no unclear terms what it looks like. And it is up to everyday people to determine something else rises from those ashes. And it's like up to us to shape that. And a lot of it is that idea of community wealth and connecting with our neighbors and not feeding into these systems that are funneling all of our resources upwards.
Right. And you talk about how basically, and they talk about how they basically want to own everything and then make us rent everything from them. And you were like, in one of your videos, you're like, fuck that. The only way to counteract this is to build our own systems, right?
Yeah.
And why the reason I like why you're doing it in this way, where it's decentralized and like we can talk about what a digital commons, I think you called it, and stuff is. But like I was like, this is the answer. And I saw in the past couple of years, like I saw the Daily Wire say the same kind of thing, but then they started firing all their people for disagreeing and just doing bad things, and doing everything they said they weren't going to do. And, so that's why it's good to decentralize the power and do it the way you're doing it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's going to look a lot like chaos on the outside, but I actually think that it's quite an opportunity for us if you get enough people pulling together in the direction of a brighter future. You just have to paint the vision for people, create the vehicle that's going to make it possible, which is how we envision TAO, and get people on board.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, can you describe exactly what a digital commons is? And I like the thing you said about how, you can connect people basically, like local people to each other to start buying locally on the app. Can you explain that whole idea? Yeah.
Okay, so digital commons, the kind of trade and microeconomies. And the other thing I wanted to touch on is I don't feel that the people at the top are like necessarily sitting around in a room like evilly plotting the overthrow of the world, right? It can feel like that sometimes, but what this is less like an evil mastermind global plan. Although, you know what? I'm always open to entertaining conspiracy theories, and nothing would surprise me, like Illuminati, whatever, Bohemian Grove, nothing's going to surprise me. But I think that it's more systems theory and just kind of naturally how these things unfold when you have this centralization of power. And every time there's a recession, every time our global economy contracts, that's when private equity and the billionaires and everyone else, it's the cheap time to buy, right? And that just keeps happening. And we don't have a way to break out of that system. So that is where we get this idea of a digital commons, is how do you create a space that belongs to everyday people? And I kind of think for that reason, I think of TAO as like almost like a mech suit for the people, right? You've got like Bezos in his Amazon mech suit. You've got Zuck in Facebook, and they've built up these digital empires, these like fiefdoms, right, that they own, and it's made them incredibly wealthy. And so when we look at the business models that they've created, it's actually the perfect blueprint. You just have to change the ownership structure. And so let's use TikTok as an example. There's 170 million just American users on TikTok, right? And that platform generates billions of dollars. And it passes through the hands of the people, through the creator fund, through TikTok Shop, and we make a little bit of money off of it, which is great. People have been able to make a living doing what they love, but what if we could take that and amplify it? And then that's, for the most part, all of that wealth is circulated back up to the shareholders. But what would it look like to make it so that that wealth doesn't get circulated to shareholders because there are none, but it stays in the ecosystem? And the idea of a digital commons is it is a space that is by the people, for the people, with the people. So there's no Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk or like digital overlord, right? It is literally just for the people in a system of collective governance. And there's a number of things we could introduce within this ecosystem that would make it of highest service to people. And one of those ideas is trade and microeconomies. And we're even talking about how we can introduce this through ethical advertising, right? Because it's interesting right now, all these different startups that are jumping into the space and they want to create the next social media platform. And the knee-jerk reaction is we're not going to have any ads. And this is a really common stance, right, from this next wave of social media. But there's a lot of a lot of platforms start off promising that, and they often cannot fulfill that promise, especially if they get investors and then are beholden to this agenda of profit over people, right? And it leads to something that we call the enshittification, it's a real word, of the platform, where people, they introduce more and more ads in order to get a return for the shareholders, right? In order to make more and more money. And so you've got this contention between the shareholders and the well-being of users on the platform. And that's why people want to get rid of ads, because they don't want it to detract from the user experience, but they fail to realize why it is people often have to introduce ads, because it is one of the best ways to monetize on a platform. And so we're trying to think of everything from the beginning, and it's like, we know ads are the best way to monetize. We also know that they can detract from the user experience. What is the middle ground? And this idea of ethical advertising. What does it look like to ask Michael what he wants to see on TikTok? Like, what are the ads that actually add value to your experience? Is it small and local businesses? Do you want to see things that the creators you follow recommend, like they've got partnerships with them? Is it whatever the case might be? And part of that, it's really powerful, because by people telling the platform, this is what I want to see, you can actually do a much better job of connecting them with the appropriate businesses. And from a financial standpoint, that actually is really helpful, for example, for small and local businesses. When you run ads on Facebook, you have to spend thousands of dollars in order to season the pixel, is what they call it. So you run enough volume through this that you can dial in who is the exact kind of person that's going to buy my stuff. And it takes a lot of money to get there. And then you have to continue to tweak it. But if you create a system where people are like, I don't want X, Y, and Z shoved down my throat, this is the only thing I'm genuinely interested in, then they can be connected with the appropriate thing. And it's one of those things where it's like a win-win-win for all involved. You are feeding two birds with one stone. And that is one way that you start to connect people to
do you say feeding two birds with one scone?
Yeah, I don't believe in stone.
I've never heard of that. That's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good one.
Yeah. So
Keep going, sorry.
No, I mean, that's essentially it. A digital commons is a space that is by the people, for the people, with the people. We are thinking of every way we can to connect people back with their local communities, right? And another way that we're doing this is partnerships. And for example, we're in talks right now with a founder an app called 24/7 Farm Fresh, and they're based down in Atlanta. They are farmers, and they are creating this application that is creating hyper local food systems. So it's connecting people with their local growers, farmers, makers, and bakers, so that we're not going through, you're essentially cutting out the middleman. We're also talking with Mayhem Marketplace. I'm not sure if you've heard of them, but kind of mission adjacent to what we're doing. And how do you take that information, like their data, and plug it into TAO Social, so that people who are on our platform, if they're interested in that, can buy a CSA box directly through the application. And so any way we can, we want to empower small and local businesses to be successful on this platform, whether it is through the advertisement, whether it is through the inbuilt functionality, whether it is through anything that or partnerships, anything that we can introduce to champion these small and local businesses.
And I think that's awesome. And I think that's the future too, because, for example, McDonald's and all these places, it's literally proven poison. I mean, it's actually, it's not like, oh, I'm choosing the not healthy option. It's a cheat day. It's like, I'm being poisoned by these companies. It's actual poison. So I think the future is eating more locally and responsibly, and just how it should be. And when more and more people trend that way, and there's more options like TAO Social that's going to have those microeconomies promoting eating locally, and it's going to taste better, it's fresher and healthier, right? The bigger companies are going to have to compete with that ethical way of providing food now. So
Yeah.
I think you're going to be changing the world in that way as well. And
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say too, like with advertising and going back to ethics and everything, I interviewed, I don't know if you've heard of this, Free Water. I interviewed the CEO of free water, where he thought that water should be a human right, which is crazy, and the way he's doing it is he's giving away water bottles for free by having ads on the packaging. And most of the time, it's like local businesses advertising on the water bottle, and that pays for the water and has profit. And he gets to still donate some to charity. And I thought that's a great idea. And his whole argument is like, if you're going to watch an ad on YouTube to see a free video, why not do the same thing to give people free water and free food? So I think there's a lot of people trending towards this ethical way of behaving for business.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I absolutely love that. What did you said it's called free water?
Yeah, free water. I did 2 interviews with him. It's a
Cool.
fascinating
Please check that
concept.
out.
And yeah.
Cool. Yeah, and to your point,
Um,
I do think that it's going to force some systemic change, but I also think we have to realize that it's going to be a fight because oftentimes these bigger players, they don't fight fair, right? And if they can sue you into the ground, they will. If they can block people from finding out about you, like for example, PexelFed is a decentralized social media application. It's an Instagram alternative, and it's built on ActivityPub. So it's a part of the Fediverse, so another like decentralized kind of protocol space. And Zuckerberg did not like that was, detracting people from Facebook. And so he started to block all outbound links going to PexelFed to keep people off the platform. So if you were on Facebook, you actually couldn't access it directly from there. And so there's things like that, and they will sue over whatever. And when it comes to food too, the other thing that they'll probably go after is regulation and compliance as far as the cottage industry and producing food at home. So that's something else that we have to think through every possible contingency and know that these people aren't necessarily going to fight fair and will do whatever they can to cling to their remaining power as we go through this transition.
I saw that you're a pretty spiritual person too, right? I
Yeah.
was going to ask you about that stuff. And do you think I'm sure you know all about the age of Aquarius and stuff like that. What do you think the future is going to look like as we're moving into this new age?
I think
And
that
do you
you
think,
already go
and
ahead.
do you think sorry to interrupt you, but because we're moving to this new age, do you think that the universe is almost like on our side in doing things like this?
Yeah. Okay. So a few things about that. As for what it's going to look like, I think you already described that really well with your vision earlier regarding like community wealth and what's actually a sustainable system. There's this Alan Watts quote that I love where he says that there is not an equal balance of good and evil in the world. There's just enough evil to give good a run for its money. And I very much believe that we have the upper hand, even though it might look like chaos, things might fall apart. It might be difficult for a time. And what I take some solace in, what's reassuring to me, is that this has actually been prophesied on either side of the Atlantic by different indigenous cultures. There's a great documentary about it called Time of the Sixth Sun. I think they've got like 89 indigenous elders. They're all talking about their individual prophecies regarding this huge shift in consciousness that would transpire. And we even see that mirrored in the book of Revelation, although it's very metaphorical, right? So the Christian book of Revelation is talking about the same thing that these indigenous cultures are. And it's the idea that we are going to see a transition from this old world paradigm of greed and exploitation and division and war and conquest into an age of peace, harmony, and brotherly love. And it's also interesting when you get into the astrology of that, right? For people who believe in these things, that Aquarius is the sign of both technology and brotherhood. And so there's all of these thematically, these things are wrapped up into the very stars that are part of our timeline right now, like this time that we're living in and what's happening in the sky. It's not an accident, right? It's not coincidental. It seems like that there is something larger being orchestrated. That's my view on it.
Mm-hmm. I was going to ask you too, I saw on your LinkedIn that you said you were an ordained metaphysical minister. And I want to ask you, I'd never heard of that title, and what exactly does that mean? And are you almost like qualified to kind of talk about? It sounds like you studied a lot of this for a long period of time.
Yeah, I've been off and on with it for a lot of my life. You did a great job doing your homework, by the way. You found all the
Oh,
interesting stuff. So yeah,
thank you.
ordained metaphysical minister. So a regular minister is going to be religious. A secular minister is going to be not religious, and a metaphysical minister. It is an actual, like, a license that I have, so I can legally marry people or perform certain rites of passage. And metaphysics is a branch of philosophy that is the study of the nature of being. And so it's kind of these energetic principles that underlie our world. You could think of it as being somewhere between like a secular minister and a religious minister. And I'm particularly interested in comparative myth and religion. It's something that I haven't been able to go into nearly as deeply as I would like to, because I've had to have like a normal career, right? And I've been in like tech and startups and venture by day. And this is something that I put time into when I have time, not very often, but it's something that I would like to at some point, like devote myself fully to that path. But at the moment, busy building things.
Right. So yeah, I
Mhm.
wanted to ask you about your background in tech, as well as because you've only been doing TAO Social for what, 2 months or so,
Yeah.
and it took off pretty fast. Pretty
Yeah.
remarkable. How many signups do you have now for it?
About 20,000.
Yeah, that's pretty good, right? That's pretty good.
Coming along.
Um,
Sure.
so yeah, what's your background in tech, and how did that prepare you for what you're doing right now?
My career path was a little bit circuitous. So I did not think that I was going to end up in tech necessarily. I always knew I wanted to do something entrepreneurial. And for that reason, I really didn't want to go to college, but it was important to my parents. So I was like, fine, I'll do it because it's important to you.
Hmm.
I ended up going to an all women's university in the middle of the woods of Virginia for 3 years, graduated early, and moved to Thailand, where I taught English, studied Thai kickboxing, and immersed myself in Theravada Buddhism. So they've got a very distinct flavor of Buddhism in Thailand. And I did that for a year and came back and I started my first business, which was in copywriting and content creation. And it started to dovetail into branding. So I ended up writing collateral for like Nobu, Montage, Hilton. It was like luxury hospitality. And I also had this roster of clients that was all different industries, everything from like business to business, SaaS, so tech stuff, um, local franchises, all of these different business models. And I was like, you know what? I could do what they're doing. Like, I don't want to be pigeonholed as a writer. I could be doing all these other things that go into building a business because I've had so much visibility into all of their operations and things. And so I ended up pivoting in like my early to mid 20s into, it's called revenue operations. And it's basically how do you use systems and processes to increase the bottom line in a company, make it more efficient, essentially. And I joined that agency. It scaled from 3 to 12. And again, like tons of exposure to tech in particular. One of my clients was actually, or one of the accounts that I managed was one of the fastest growing tech companies in the States at the time. And it was a lot of wonderful experience. And during that time, I also launched my second business, which was an e-commerce company. It was activewear printed to look like fantasy and science fiction armor. So it was like Dungeons and Dragons inspired, ridiculous. It was like Paladin, Rogue, and Mage was the first release. And it was really fun, except for the fact that I ended up dropping that and the agency to go into a venture studio. And actually, that's probably, if we're going to talk a little bit about the supernatural stuff and the spiritual stuff, that might be worth touching on. So I had done this company, this e-commerce venture, beginning to end, like everything myself, right? And it had gotten to a point where I was a little bit burnt out on it. And I was like, I don't feel like this is totally aligned with where I want to be going. Like, I really don't want to be running an e-commerce business. This is fun, but it doesn't feel like it's in service to something. And I have a hard time finding fulfillment unless I feel like it's connected to a bigger purpose. And I decided that I was going to shelve it, and I like grieved for 3 days. I did not get out of bed. I felt kind of like I was giving up, but also like it was just not the right path for me. And it was like a small death rebirth. And at the end of that, I was like, Spirit, God, please send me an opportunity to better learn how to build and scale businesses. And a month later, a serial entrepreneur stumbled onto my YouTube channel, which is about like God and mysticism and science and where they intersect. It was this video where I was wearing a Renaissance gown and a suit of armor. Don't ask. And he basically found me on LinkedIn and was like, hey, I'm going to build a bunch of companies with this venture studio that I founded. Come be the idea source for us in my idea lab. And so I ended up going and working at a venture studio for 3 years. Top ranked venture studio. And a venture studio, in case people aren't familiar, is like the most recent addition to the venture ecosystem. So in venture, you've got an incubator where people might go to develop their ideas. Things are incubating, right? They're kind of percolating. An accelerator, where you might take your startup in order to amplify its traction. And so might help you with go to market or past that. And then you've got like, the investors like venture capital or angel investors or family offices or whatever. A venture studio is end to end. So it's everything from the ideation of a business to the development of that, to the launching and the funding and potentially exiting. And so I got to work at this venture studio, both at the studio level and across their entire portfolio of companies for the last 3 years. And a lot of that was tech. So my time at the agency, largely tech, and my time at the venture studio, largely tech.
Wow, so you've been up to a lot. Sounds like you have grown. I'm sure you grew. Did your time in tech almost have you grow spiritually? Going through all, I saw like you said you kind of got screwed over in some deals, and that kind of forced you to like look inward and kind of redo and reorder a lot of yourself in your life.
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever specifically said that, but that's actually a really accurate way of stating that. Yeah, at some point you get fucked over in business, you get burned because, again, old world paradigm, right? And when that happens, it's always a good idea to like take inventory, right? Like, why did this happen? How can I prevent it from happening in the future? And for me, I learned a lot about how to kind of maneuver politically within a business space when I have to. And it was something that like I was really naive going into a lot of this, and I just trusted people, right? And then I realized people were conducting themselves in a way I didn't understand. There was a game being played, and I didn't understand what the game was or why people were playing it. And I had to uh, experience firsthand being on the very losing end of that game to understand what it was, why it's played, and how to play it. And so that's something that was like a lesson hard earned, but I think it'll serve me well in the future, especially when creating like something like TAO and understanding the vested interests of, the powers that be and how to protect a platform like this. So it was trial by fire, but I think it was necessary.
Mm. So do you think you went through some of those experiences almost on purpose? Some like the universe made you go through them in order to be ready to do something like TAO Social that could be a big game changer for the future?
I don't know. I hope so, but I've gone back and forth between I really hope that these experiences are preparing me for something meaningful, right? So it doesn't just feel like a waste or like it was all pointless. And then there's been times where I'm like, I really feel like it may have been pointless, And so I can't say that I'm far enough along in my journey to know for sure. What I can say is this past summer, after had some run-ins with this unethical company, I had this dream where I was standing on this ship and I was talking to people that I'd met in Thailand, of all places. It was like 7 years ago. And we were just like, what have you been up to? How have you been? And they asked me what I had been up to. And I started speaking initially to them, like telling them kind of what had happened. But then it's like slowly transitioned from me explaining to them what was happening in my life to talking to God and like getting really angry. And we're on this ship and I walk to the front of the ship. And by the time I'm at the front of the ship, I'm screaming. I was like, give me something to build. Those were the very specific words. And I wasn't intending to do another startup, right? But a few months later, when I was seeing what was happening in the space, and there's a lot of people who are well-meaning entering the space right now, right? And trying to build the next social media platform. And a lot of it is a cash grab. And most of it is going to fall into the same cycles and pitfalls that we've seen before. And as someone who's good at systems thinking and pattern recognition, I was like, oh, someone has to do something differently. I'm just going to put this idea out there and see. And I was not expecting TAO to get the traction that it did, but it did. And maybe it is something to build. I have no idea where it goes. But I know that me and my team are going to put our all into it and really hope that this becomes what it could be in the world, the social media platform that always should have existed.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I'm just curious, what do you think? Because I love all the metaphysical stuff too. I'm sure you've had like a spiritual awakening. I have my own kind of thing too. And I was curious what you think the nature of reality is based on your study in metaphysics and your experience in Thailand studying Buddhism and all that stuff.
I think all religions and spiritual paths are like spokes on a wheel pointing inward to a central truth. And I think one of those big capital T truths is that we are one consciousness manifesting as infinite possibilities. Like when we talk about like God or spirit or in science, their quantum physics is catching up to the same thing. So the idea of a 0 point field, it is all the same thing. And we have this illusion of division, this illusion of duality when we come down here to what I like to call Earth School. But as campy as it sounds, or as cheesy as it sounds, like we really are all connected. And I think that part of this big transition that we're living through right now is people remembering that and people coming home to what we really are, which is, I think this has been said often, spiritual beings having a human experience.
Mm-hmm. I'm just curious. My last guest, she's all in the metaphysics and stuff. Her name is Dana Kippel. So we were talking about this for it was like 3 hours. And I was asking her about simulation theory and the nature of fractals. Do you think any of that's possible? That we keep making a
simulation, and whether we look at it from like a scientific point of view or like a mystical point of view, there's actually a lot of stories like there's a Hopi myth about grandmother spider. There's Indra's web. So it's Hinduism, and it's this idea that reality is like this cosmic web, and from each kind of intersection on the web there hangs this jewel, and in that jewel is refracted the whole. And so it's the same idea of a hologram. It's the exact same thing, because the idea of a hologram is that if you have like a truly holographic bookmark, and say it's an image of like two dolphins jumping or something, and you cut it up into a million tiny pieces and you shine a laser through it, even though it might be like the tip of the dolphin's fin, it actually it projects the entire image. That's how you know that it's a true hologram. And that is a metaphor for reality, and we find it in our mythology as well. And then scientists, again, coming at it from the angle of simulation theory, but they're all talking about the same thing, which is that reality is not what we perceive with our five senses. It's a whole lot more than that.
What do you think is going to happen in our society and economically as AI takes over more and more jobs, and people are like, they're so used to having a 9 to 5 being their purpose, and they don't have to really do that anymore. And we're kind of transitioning into almost like a new kind of renaissance where people can use their creativity. What do you think this new world we're blossoming into is going to be like, and the transition into it?
I think that it might be a little bit of a forked road, because if it happens like the WEF has laid it out and all those people, I think it ends up looking like a two-tiered rent economy where people are squished into these 15-minute cities. You've got a limit on like how much beef you can eat or how far you drive your car, or if you can drive a car at all. It's really interesting to look at some of their theorizing about that stuff, and it looks a little Hunger Games, but not necessarily the fighting to the death part, just the discrepancy, right? And people potentially on a universal basic income so that they can live a very basic life. I think the alternative is that when people use this technology to empower themselves, and so yeah, you could make the case that AI is going to get rid of all these jobs, right? But they also said the same thing about the internet, and the internet created more jobs than it ever destroyed. And so with AI, yes, it is going to make it easier for corporations to eliminate their workers, but it also makes it very possible for workers to create products, services, innovations that they otherwise would not have been able to. Like, it is leveling the playing field by dropping the barrier to entry. And what we're going to see is also not going to be in favor of the existing institutions in some way. We're already seeing people like move away from Hollywood, right? Like, no one watches the Oscars anymore. And instead we've got like our Netflix, and we've got social media, right? Like, we're spending so much time on social media than we are necessarily going to the movies. And now with AI, people are going to be able to, we're already starting to see it, people creating full-length feature films from their laptop. And that's going to become a whole new kinds of economy, where I think what we're going to see is more and more people becoming entrepreneurial, and potentially a gig economy as well, where you might have like one kind of main thing, but you've actually got multiple streams of revenue coming in. And I also think that it's going to free us up to be much more in control of our time and our autonomy. So I think that I think it could go a very positive direction as long as people are brave enough to step away from the existing systems, to be purchasing from their neighbors, and step into this different kind of system.
It's so cool that you're. It must feel nice to know that you're actually a part of that process, right? That you're actually building into the space.
Trying. I mean, you never
Trying.
know with startups, right? They're so uncertain. It's a very it's a very risky game. So we'll see. Like it feels good to be aligned with something and like trying to do something that's meaningful and has purpose. But who knows where it goes.
Mm. And then I saw like in one of your videos, you're talking about how like your greatest motivation in life is being in service to God. And do you feel like you're born at this specific time with a certain mission? And what do you want your legacy to be?
Those are big questions. I think we're all born at this specific time for a reason. Like there's I watch a lot of stuff about near death experiences, and there have been a number of people who, if they recall what happens in their near death experience, a number of people come back and say, we choose the life that we incarnate into. And that to me is really interesting because that also means that we're choosing the timing, right? Not just who we are, but also the time that we choose to come here. And I think that, like I said, this has been prophesied on either side of the Atlantic, what we're seeing unfold. And I think that by incarnating here at this time, we have like front row seats to maybe one of the biggest shows in human history. I think it's a lot of potentially what we could term spiritual warfare, like coming to a head. And we get to be present for all of that. And so I think that anyone who's here at this time, and especially if they're interested in having the conversations, like I think we're all a part of it. And it's interesting. I've never tried to put words to what I would like my legacy to be. But I think if I were to be remembered, I would want it to be for, I would want to be remembered for building alternate systems that helped people step into a very full and thriving version of their life. And that's one thing, like, there was, for a long time, I thought that maybe I would go into some kind of healing field, right? Like therapist or go study with the Shipibo or something. And while that's interesting to me, I always felt limited by working one-to-one, and especially being a systems thinker. I'm like, I want to build things that systemically cause shifts. And so, yeah, I'd like to be part of the paradigm shift that's occurring right now. That's really what's front and center for me.
Well, it sounds like you're right where you need to be then.
I hope so.
Cool. Yeah. Um, can you explain how like because there's going to be no shareholders in TAO and with the money generated by ads, how is it going to be circulated back into the users? How's that
Yeah.
whole economy system going to work?
There's a few ways that this can work. One thing that we're talking about is if someone does want to like sell their data, right? Because a lot of people don't care. Like it was so funny watching with TikTok when they went to ban it and people were like, you know what? Fuck you, big daddy government. We're going to drop ship our data directly to the doorstep of the CCP by getting on Red Note, right? Like they did not care.
Yeah.
And that's the attitude of a lot of people. Like, I don't care that the Chinese government potentially knows that I like watching border collies run. You know what I mean? Like, it's just so silly. Like, there's nothing there that could necessarily be used against me. And I know that there's concerns about how that could be used to manipulate politics, but that already happens in our own media system, you
The
know?
thing
So
is, our government is so much worse. It's like if you're going to say that about China, you have to stop doing it to your own citizens. Otherwise, shut the fuck up. You
yeah,
know?
exactly. Well, and I think
Yeah.
people are also waking up to the fact that like we've kind of been the evil empire, you know, and I love
Hmm.
this country and I love the vision that our founding fathers have or had, and we have done them a great disservice by steering things in the direction that they've gone, you know? So yeah, so that idea of if people sell their own data, they choose to opt fully into ads, then they can split the revenue with the platform. I just think that that's another hilarious kind of fuck you. It's like, well, if you're going to take my data, I'm at least going to make money off of it. So there's that aspect of it. Also, some kind of creator fund, right, where people can be making money the same way that they do off TikTok. And we're exploring like the e-commerce component, doing something kind of adjacent to TikTok Shop, but probably sourcing more small, local, or and it can be medium, right? It can be enterprise, but they have to not be, doing evil things in the world. And we'll probably leave it up to the community how we set those parameters. And a lot of this is going to be an ongoing conversation. Another thing that we're exploring to make this truly unfuckwithable is to introduce an irrevocable trust. And this gets into legal stuff that I'm not super well versed in, but we are bringing in all the experts to help us land on the right answer here. And the trust, we would just have to figure out who the beneficiaries are, right? Is it the creators? Is it some kinds of innovation arm, or how can we set that up to ensure that the funds are always appropriately distributed to where it's meant to go? And so it's an ongoing conversation. It's going to be, the funds are going to be or the revenue is going to be disseminated all the ways we would traditionally see with something like TikTok. But if it were to grow to the size of TikTok, we would see the benefit to the people amplified because it's not going to shareholders and there's no returns that are owed. And additionally, we're looking at other ways of introducing revenue streams that would be unique to TAO.
And then you talk a lot about how TAO Social is team human versus everything that keeps us divided. How exactly would you describe team human versus not team human? We kind of already covered a little bit about it, but
yeah, it's the whole idea of, it's not, people like to see division, right? When we're in these meat suits, we're like, we have the ego mind and it sees the differences between things and it sees where we end and something else begins. And we've got like these categories. It's like black and white and gay and straight and Republican and Democrat. But if you drop under that, it again goes back to that idea of one consciousness manifesting as infinite possibilities, right? Like that idea that before anything, we're human. Before we are whatever our meat suit is, our walk of life, our religious beliefs, our political beliefs, like we are fundamentally human. That is our shared experience and it's sacred. And so that idea of team human versus everything that seeks to keep us divided, our systems are currently dividing us in any way they can, right? They want us sliced and diced and divided because we are so much powerful when we are united, when we are together as one. And I would say that what's not team human is the idea that you can replace humans with AI, this kind of technocracy that is also a potential for our future, right? Or transhumanism is what they call it, where you essentially replace what's human about humans with robotics and AI and these things that are not human. And so I think that when we talk about team human, it really is our shared experience as human beings versus everything that tries to make us forget what we are and how we're connected.
And then how are you going to, because division kind of deals with censorship and stuff, how are you going to deal with censorship and choose, what is, because, some things that are very dividing do get censored on other platforms. How are you going to pick and choose, and what's your policy going to be on censorship?
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about content moderation, hate speech, and what to do if the platform gets shut down, because that's another very real possibility. So on the note of content moderation, another person we have on our team who's really amazing is Ally Madrone, and he is a trust and safety expert who's very deep in this space, and he's introducing us to a range of different partnerships that could really set this platform apart in so many ways. For example, he's introducing us to someone who has this system for digital verification, where we could potentially, we could potentially eliminate bots and impersonators from the platform. And he's also very much involved in the trust and safety space. So things like we've got a potential partnership for sussing out deep fakes or things that shouldn't be on the platform. And so from a content moderation standpoint, we've got some cool partnerships. And it's also this idea that so often we don't know what the truth is. Like there's been misinformation on both sides and people pointing fingers and us never really being able to get to the root of things. Excuse me.
If you need water, it's okay. You can get some water.
Yeah, give me just a minute.
Okay. I'll get some too.
I'm not used to talking for so long. I'm kind of quiet, believe it or not, despite how I appear on TikTok. So
I used to do broadcasts on Twitch where I'd stream like for 24 hours in a row. I used to be crazy. And my voice would, get like that, just awful. So
24 hours?
I did one for 3 days straight and I started hallucinating. And I'm like, never again, not doing that.
Yeah, I also once stayed awake for 3 days because I was excited about a creative project and I was seeing things by the end of it. And I was like, okay, I'm going to bed. That's very real.
What'd you start seeing? I was curious.
They were blue frogs with headlights for eyes.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. I started seeing spiders and I'm like, nope. At the time I was deathly afraid of spiders. I was like, nope.
Yeah, no thanks. No thanks. Okay, what was the question? We were talking about, oh, content moderation, uh, hate speech, and what happens if the app gets shut down. Okay, so we've got these different partnerships that I think are going to make us unique in how we're handling platform content on the platform. It's going to make it relatively safe. So bots, impersonators, that kind of thing, adult content, all of that. We are also we're exploring a system where people don't necessarily just get deplatformed, right? Or banned for speaking their mind. That should never happen. And we see it happen on both the left and the right. And like everyone wants to be the victim and be like, oh, they're coming after us. And I'm like, it's someone who's like dead center. It's happening on both sides. And people should be able to have opinions and conversations and disagree and share their stories regardless of how uncomfortable it makes other people. But we also don't want to veer into the territory of hate speech. And so one way that we're handling, for example, the misinformation aspect of it is if something is potentially misinformation, rather than just taking down one of Ian Carroll's videos, right? You just mark it the likelihood of this might be misinformation. Here's our scale of confidence that it is. And when that does happen, or if something is very controversial, so whether it's misinformation or it's controversial, it opens up a wiki page where you can see both sides of the debate on that. We're also exploring an AI partnership. Realm V has a company called Subiquity, and I don't know if this will be the exact partnership, but he's very much a pioneer thinker in conversational game theory, which is using AI to moderate conflicts. And the only way to win in an argument is to fight fair. And so the way that it might look in the app is like, say you get into a disagreement with someone, and rather than it being as unproductive as it usually is, these people can choose to enter into a space that is gamified, and they can have this conversation and get feedback from AI before they send things on how to engage in an actually productive conversation and help people land on a consensus. But it's not something that's forced, right? Like the idea is never to force things on people. It's if they want to partake and start getting out of the echo chambers and onto the bridges. So that's a couple of ways that we're doing that as far as content moderation. Hate speech is a little bit tricky because what we see is people crying hate speech when it's not hate speech, right? And we see this with both the left and the right. On the left, it might be something like if you are a female athlete, this just happens, who takes a knee during, what was it? She's like a fencing pro, and she took a knee because her opponent was a biological male. That's not hate speech, right? Like someone not being comfortable competing, and that's not hate speech. It can be contentious, right? And we have to have a conversation about it, like what's actually fair. People are going to have different opinions. We're also seeing the same thing. The big example right now is Israel and Palestine, right? Like the whole thing, you cannot have a conversation. You cannot say anything about Israel without being labeled anti-Semitic. It's ridiculous. Meanwhile, like how many tens of thousands of people have to die before it's considered a genocide? And they just don't want us calling it for what it is. And so they cry hate speech. You just hate Jews, when that's not at all what's happening. You might have to bleep some of that because I think YouTube doesn't like it either. But like, that's the truth, right? It has nothing to do with someone's race or religion, and everything to do with the policies of their government and doing what they've done to these people. And not to say that there hasn't been wrongs done on both sides, but the facts that we can't even have a conversation tells us who really holds the power in that situation. So we have to be mindful with hate speech that we're not just someone's not crying wolf, right? And it has to be something that genuinely is like, okay, this is the KKK calling for the, acts of violence against minorities or whatever the case might be.
So would you say that hate speech is like actual, because like, you can't cry a fire in a crowded movie theater, right? That's the classic example.
Yeah.
There's already certain protections under freedom of speech that you can't do certain things. So like hate speech would be, in my opinion, calling for the death of someone or an attack on someone for their race or religion, or, that's calling for an actual action to be done to hurt someone versus, just an opinion or something, right?
I completely agree with that. Yeah. But it also goes both ways. So for people who are like cheering for the assassination of DJT, like that also should be considered hate speech. Like you're literally promoting the death of another human being, regardless of how much you hate him. Like it's not appropriate. And so I think
Who?
that has to be, yeah, all of that. I totally agree with your definition of that.
Wait, who just D who?
Trump.
Oh, Trump. Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah. And another thing that we're doing is the idea of giving people the ability to choose what kind of information they want to see and how much. So like, are you kind of interested in some conspiracy theories? Because then you can like allow that into your feed. If you want nothing to do with it, then that's also an option. And
I
so
think
give
that'll
people,
help a lot.
yeah, I think
That'll
so.
help a lot, you know. Yeah.
I think so too. And like, it also gives people a way of like choosing what their experience is on the platform. Do you want to not be exposed to anything controversial? You just want it super squeaky clean as possible? Cool, you can have that experience. Do you want to
Mhm.
see where the contention is and like where people disagree and maybe jump in there and try to be a bridge? You can have that experience too. And everything we do, like at the very heart of our ethos, is putting all of the power back into the hands of the users.
That's what Earth might be. Earth might be like, hey, I want to go see a little bit of the chaos and be in the mix of, you know, multiversal conspiracy theories. This is going on versus like just having your own experience or something.
I completely.
What do you think about humor though? How do you know? Because I'm a comedian, so I tend to have a darker sense of humor. And what I always say is like, if I make a 9/11 joke or I make a cripple joke, I'm making fun of the absurdity about how terrible that thing is. I don't think it's funny people died in the towers, you know.
Right.
I think it's funny how and dark how absurd that kind of thing even happened, as well as, you know, going to the conspiracy theories, a lot more stuff's coming out about how it might have really been an inside job, honestly. But,
Mm-hmm.
you
And
know,
those
so how are
people
you
have been
going to,
called crazy for 20 years, and the truth is just starting to come out, which is exactly why we shouldn't be banning things because they're misinformation. When years later, it's like, well, maybe the CIA did assassinate JFK. You
Mhm,
know, like maybe that was also an inside job. So
right.
I totally
And
agree.
often humor kind of points and exposes inconsistencies in mainstream narratives. So, uh, what's going to be your take or your team's take on humor?
What do you think it should be? Because I'm open.
Well,
Not that isn't a point that we've specifically discussed because I
mhm,
also can have like a pretty morbid sense of humor, and I think that if you can't laugh at something, it has power over you, right? Like if you can't poke
mhm.
fun at it, it owns you in a way. And so I think that humor is actually in a lot of ways a form of empowerment. And I also have very thick skin and am difficult to offend. So I'm curious, as a comedian, what's your take on it?
Again, I would just say as long as you're not calling for the physical harm of another human being, where it's clear, you know, obviously it's clear you are intending consequences on a group of people or something. As long as it's clearly a joke or clearly a meme or something like Instagram has some of the most horrific, offensive things, but I never laugh harder. I mean, it's so funny. I think it's hilarious. But, you know, and I would say it has to be you're obviously trying to do some harm to somebody. I'd
Yeah.
say it has to be under legal rights that already exist. Otherwise, it should be left on.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think too, maybe that could even be one of those things where if we're gonna give the power back to users to determine their experience, they can tell us whether or not they want to see things that have a dark sense of humor, right? Because that's just another way
Mhm.
of putting it back on the user to determine their experience. Yeah, but I
But
think
then, sorry to cut you off, but then you're going to have to put people's content into certain categories. And then some people might not and will start complaining about like, I'm not getting enough reach here because, you know, I got put in this category, but I don't think I'm in that category. You know what I mean?
interesting.
So then
Well,
it'll make another kind of problem.
yeah, the way that we're, at least in our MVP, which is not going to have a very sophisticated algorithm, right? What we're doing essentially is we're asking people to themselves label what the category is going to be. And essentially the content creator is determining like what actually is my niche, and that determines it goes into the right feed and
Mm,
reaches the right people. And over
okay.
time, we're looking to automate that, like the way that it's done on TikTok, but that's a really interesting thing to consider. And we don't have necessarily all the answers right now, right? And the thing about, especially when we get into moderation, is it's never really been done right or in a way that people are like, hey, that's a great system, right? Like there's nothing we can point to and be like, round of applause. It
Hmm.
doesn't exist yet. And that's not to say that it can't. It just means that finding that solution is likely going to take a lot of people pooling their collective creativity, knowledge, and ideas in order to land on something that's relatively innovative. And that's why like a lot of what we do with TAO is crowdsource ideas. Like, what do you think? What should it look like? How do we co-create something that is of service to the highest good of all involved? And it can be an ongoing conversation. So now that you've mentioned humor, it's going to be in my brain, and next time it comes up, yeah. So that's good it's a good thing to think about.
Yeah, so that is cool. I see that you have everyone kind of voting on what the what you did, what the name will be, and what the symbol of TAO will be, and like the branding and all that kind of stuff. So are most things going to be democratic like that, or are other things going to be executive decisions?
I think we're going to have a phased democracy, and eventually we want to give as much control over to the users as possible. But everyday people don't necessarily know how to build a company or how to make it profitable, right? And so we have to get it to a certain point where it is stable and self-sustaining before we hand it off to people. Otherwise, it's going to be handing off like a wobble-legged baby deer to a pack of wolves. You know, there's always bad actors. I'm not saying that people are going to be irresponsible with it, but you can always have people who take things way off the rails. And so we have to plan for all possible contingencies. And part of that is going to be introducing this in a phased way. And we're also, this is one of those things where we are bringing in experts, DAOs, Web3, governance, to have these conversations about what are the potential pitfalls? How do we account for them? And so we have not figured out the exact DAO structure yet. We know that it's going to be a decentralized autonomous organization, but what are the bylaws? What is it? How do we avoid something like mob rule, right? Which is typically what people's gripe is with a direct democracy. And so there's all of these things that we have to think through and account for. And for that reason, it's likely going to be phased. It is going to be phased governance for a couple of reasons. One is we have to get the platform to a place of being stable first. And two is we have to figure out the most optimal possible way to give this to people in a way that it can't be, you know, hijacked, co-opted, or just completely taken sideways. And so we have a lot of accounting to do for in that regard. But the idea is that people determine what's going to be done with it.
You can make it like a representative like republic and have its own Congress, and then take all the oldest people from the app and have them fill the Congress and make all the decisions.
Interesting. Yeah. We'll see. We've talked about a liquid democracy, which I like conceptually, and it's this idea of you take the best elements of a republic and the best elements of a direct democracy. So people can vote on specific issues that they are informed on, but people aren't going to be able to keep up with every aspect of the platform, just like you can't keep up with every aspect of our government, right? And so that's why we don't have a direct democracy, is because, first of all, very difficult to do at scale unless you have blockchain, which we do now. But also, like, people aren't informed on everything they need to be in order to make those decisions, which is why we have experts that we elect and they represent us. In a liquid democracy, there are some things that we should be able to vote on directly, like war. Should our country go to war? That is something that everyone knows enough about that we could make a decision. And guess what? The answer would always be no, which is why if you introduce something like a liquid democracy on a national level, you would never see war in the world again, because everyday people don't want violence. They don't want the death of whoever. That's like literally our governments and defense contractors and people who make money off of it that want those things. And so by combining with a liquid democracy, you vote specifically on some things that you're going to be informed on, but you can also give your vote to a representative who you trust to vote on the other things for you because they are informed and experts on that. And so that could be another way of doing that. But I think we debate it. And there's the other thing is, like, we don't have to reinvent the wheel either, because there's a lot of DAOs out there that have experimented with a lot of different things. And part of the work of the TAO team and the ecosystem that we pull in is who's done this well, who's done this right, what can we learn, and how do we take all of their best principles to create an optimal governance structure for the app.
Okay, yeah. I was just joking about the republic, because I was saying like how our Congress is old and just taking a bunch of old people and
Yeah. No, you're totally right. Actually, we could just create a microcosm of the current disaster. That's another option.
Yeah, I was just joking. Who are some people who really have inspired you in your life?
I'm really inspired by people on the business side and the spiritual side. And so business, I really like the Hormozis, and particularly Layla Hormozi, because she's someone who's really like a master of her craft, and she's also been so ethical and is showing, like, they're in private equity, right, which has a super bad name, which it private equity, it's like blockchain or crypto, right? It has like a really bad reputation, but only because of how it's been used. The actual functionality is fairly neutral. It depends on the paradigm of the people. And so Alex and Layla have what is it, acquisition.com, and it's essentially private equity and venture capital, but they do minority stakes, and everything they do is so ethical that they pay people what they deserve. They've got like a revenue pool for their employees. Like, it's how business should be done. And so I really look up to people who aren't like completely into, like, I'm not super into the communist thing, right? Like, that's never been something that resonated with me, just having been raised in the States and the kinds of things that we're taught about that. And who is taking capitalism and doing it right? And I think that they're a good example of it. And I think that, you know, you could even go further and create these systems for community wealth. And so Layla Hormozi is someone that I very much look up to. I also am very inspired by Alan Watts, I mentioned. I love Ram Dass. So they're spiritual, but they're also funny and like poke fun at the whole human experience, which I find very relatable because it's the whole being in a meat suit thing. Pretty ridiculous, but a good time. I am inspired by, I would also say my parents, to be honest. I don't know if it's a weird thing to say, but they have been people who, they hold themselves to really high standards, and that's always something that I've sought to emulate. And yeah, they've been really important in my life. And so I think off the top of my head, that's probably who it would be.
Did you grow up spiritual, or did that come later in your life?
My mom gave me my first copy of the Tao Te Ching when I was 8, which is not why, by the way, the app is named Tao, right? Like, that was actually not my first choice, but it was a good one. So I was like, cool. I my mom had like a little bit of an Eastern bent, right? Like, she would go like the chakra center and she did yoga. I was baptized Catholic. My grandparents are very Catholic, but I was interested like kind of off and on. So it's not like I had an active spiritual practice, but I had a really like a deep interest in the occult starting in my early teens. And the reason for that is I started to have precognitive dreams, or what Christians would call prophetic dreams, right? Where you dream something before it happens. And I was really freaked out by that and didn't know how to make sense of it. And so went looking for answers. Eventually it got to the point where it was creeping me out so much that I tried to shut it off, and it came back online in Thailand, right? And I had gone to Thailand to study Buddhism, but that was less the spiritual thing and more because I was pretty depressed at the time, and Buddha had figured out how to end suffering. And I was like, I'm going to take a page out of his sutra and go to a place that's super Buddhist, right? And so there was that aspect of it. And then in my 20s, I started to take an interest in women's mystery traditions and Christianity. And that's kind of where I sit now. And so it's been kind of present through my whole life. I've had a lot of supernatural experiences that I'm not always, I mean, I guess I do talk openly about it because I talk about it on TikTok and the like, but it's always kind of been present to some extent, I would say. And I didn't start necessarily very actively pursuing it until my adult life, and really after Thailand.
What's like the craziest spiritual experience you're willing to share, if there are any? Because I saw that you shared quite a bit on like your YouTube and some on TikTok and stuff. So
I'll share one because I think that it's something that a lot of people, a surprising amount of people, can relate to, which is after death communication. And when I was my early 20s, I just moved like right outside of Sedona because again, after Thailand, I started to have some of these intuitive things come back online, and I am very like grounded in reality. Like, in so many ways, I'm very 3D, right? Like, I build things, I'm quite logical, but then having these experiences that fall outside the framework of reality we've been handed. And I was like, I need answers. So I moved to the New Age Mecca of the world, Sedona, actually a little bit outside of that, like the cow country kind of area outside of it. And for about 2 years, I was informally apprenticed to this medicine woman. She had been adopted into the Lakota Sioux. She had helped the Kogi reclaim a lot of their ancestral land in Colombia. And she was just a really interesting woman. I would go on her retreats with her sometimes. And the first retreat I went with her on was Mount Shasta. which is beautiful mountain in the Pacific Northwest. And we went, and I was still skeptical about a lot of this. And it also, like, there is stuff to me that just seems like super woo, right? And we went on this tour where this woman was talking about like the Lemurians who live under the mountain, and we were doing like shamanic journeying, and it was like super hippy dippy. And I was kind of like rolling my eyes the whole day. But we get back to the hotel, and I'm rooming with the medicine woman. And we talk until like 2 o'clock in the morning. And I'm like, yeah, you know, today was fun, but I just like, some of this seems like so silly to me. And like, it's not that I don't believe that there's something beyond what we can see. I don't know what it is. And like, more than anything, I want to know. And if it is real, like, I want to be a part of it. And the kind of last thing I said to her was, I wish I knew for sure. And we get to this cusp area between waking and sleeping. And all of a sudden, the hotel door room blows open. There's a figure standing there all in white. I can't really see because I'm blind without my glasses or my contacts. And she's standing there. And I jump up out of bed. Woman turns around and starts walking down the hall. And I run and I grab Mally's ceremonial spear because I think someone has broken in. I'm about to like go fuck a bitch up. And so I get to the threshold of the door, and Mally's like, wait, don't leave me. And I turned around like laughing because she was kind of serious and that she was scared, but it was also like such a goofy thing to say in the moment. And so I turn around. We're both like laughing, but also terrified. And the light on my side of the bed blows out and starts smoking. And Mally's like, you know what that means, right? I was like, no. And she's like, the electrical stuff is a sign of strong spirit activity. And I don't believe this at the time. So I call the front desk and I'm like, hey, did you give anyone our cards? Like, or did you issue another card? Like, someone just broke into our room. I don't know how that's possible. And they're like, it was like a hotel door, you know, they're like heavy ones, they shut automatically and they have key card to open them, right? And they hadn't issued another card. They had two out, and they were like both literally on my nightstand. So it didn't make any sense. We go down the next morning, go to the front desk and ask, do you have any spirit activity? And they're like, yeah, there's this woman, Shirley, who likes to like play with lights, and sometimes she opens doors. But they had never heard of like a full-blown apparition, which is what she was. She looked like a physical person standing in the threshold of the door. And I was like, no way. And I was not, to be honest, I was still, and it's not like I'm open-minded, right? So, and like I said, nothing is going to surprise me at this point. I've just seen and experienced too much that shattered my complete worldview and paradigm, and I've had to restructure it each time until you don't get so attached to the worldview or what you think is the way things are supposed to be. And I put a pin in that. I was like, okay, maybe there really is something to this whole spirit world, life after death, whatever it might be. So 6 months later, I am working late, and I walk into what was like my kind of living room area at the time. And there's this big central light in the room on the ceiling, and it starts to flicker. And I'm like, who's there? Because I was like, I know that. I've seen that before. And the light goes out, and I get hit by this wave of grief. Like, I can't explain it. I am just completely flattened by grief. And I am literally on the ground in the fetal position, sobbing hysterically, and I don't know why. And even as it's happening, I'm like, I am grieving right now, but I don't know why. Like, I have no idea what's happening. This is very strange behavior. 3 days later, I get a call from someone who was a friend of a friend in high school. We had this mutual friend, and she was letting me know that that friend had just passed and that her funeral was that day. And I was like, I wonder if Kate, that was her name, I wonder if it was Kate who came to visit me. And the following weekend, I'm driving down to Scottsdale, and a song comes on the radio, Gooey by the Glass Animals. And I think of Kate, which I don't know. I don't know if she ever listened to them. I mean, she must have listened to them, but that song came out a year after high school, and we had lost touch because she had fallen into drugs and was in and out of jail, and she was dealing with like a lot of difficult stuff. I'd never been able to get a hold of her. And so I didn't know specifically that she listened to that artist or that song, but it reminded me of Kate. All I remember is that she liked Brooke Candy and Grimes, which is like a far cry away from the Glass Animals. And I pull over, and I'm just, again, sobbing because I'm thinking of Kate. And then like 2 weeks later, someone posted a video of her on Instagram, and it was her dancing in her room. It's got like this beautiful soft focus lens, fairy lights in the background, and she is singing and dancing to Gooey by the Glass Animals. And like, all the hair on my body stood up, and I was like, okay, there's something to this. There's definitely something to this. So that's one experience that I had. Another one, because
Those are not small, by the way. Those are pretty big ones.
those are pretty substantial, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think they've been necessary too, because I think I've had to relinquish a lot of like my materialist worldview, right, that we've all been indoctrinated into. And these experiences have really forced me to question things. Another experience, I don't know which one is crazier. That one might be pretty crazy. This one is pretty crazy. In my early 20s, this may have actually been before Thailand, but I was at my grandmother's and I was falling asleep, and I've never felt unsafe in their house before, but I felt like very unsafe at that time for whatever reason. And I'm having a hard time falling asleep, but I get again to that cuspy area between waking and sleeping. It's an altered state of consciousness. And I'm suddenly standing in the middle of the room. And I look over and my body is on the bed. And I have this like mantle of raven feathers and this staff. And I speak words in a language I've never heard before. And it was like a spell. It was like a blanket of calm fell over the room. I felt like swaddled in safety and I fell asleep. I woke up the next morning and I had the word shaman in my head, which I didn't have any association with that at the time, except for like, I was like, I think it's like a Native American, like spiritual chief or something. Like, I don't know. I would find out years later that shamanism has actually existed in every culture around the world for the last 30,000 years, and they all share very similar cosmologies, despite those cultures never having contact with one another. So it's like the original spirituality, right? And I went downstairs, and I think it was like Christmas time, so speaking to my dad, and I was like, hey, are we Vikings? Because I had this distinct impression that that woman, whoever she was like Nordic, like it was unmistakable. And my family is super into genealogy on all sides, and they've gone really far back. And my dad was like, no, we're like Irish and Italian, a little of this, a little that, but nothing Nordic. 2 years later, he takes a DNA test and we're Danish. And I specifically asked him if we were Danish. And he was like, so my dad is aware that this stuff is real too, right? Like sometimes I share these experiences too because there were other witnesses, and I think that adds a layer of credibility to them. And then to take it a step further, about a year ago, maybe it was a year and a half, but I had a medical incident and no one knew about it except the person I was with, and I was in the hospital. And I get a text from a friend of mine who actually taught me remote viewing. And he's, again, like a C-suite guy by day, but he does this mystical stuff by night. There's a lot of us out there that are like, I call us closet mystics. And he texted me while I was in the hospital, and he was like, what's going on? Are you okay? She told me to check on you. I was like, what are you talking about? And come to find out that in his meditation, he'd had that figure, that Nordic lady figure, come to him in meditation and be like, hey, you need to reach out to Chiara. She's not in a good place right now. And literally no one knew I was in the hospital except the person I was with. So it was really wild. And those are a couple of stories I'll share.
Do you think she's a spirit guide, or what people call spirit guides, or an ancestor spirit guide thing?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. Spirit guide feels like it might be the case, and then part of me is like, is she an ancestor? Is that me in a past life? Are all those the same thing? Like, I don't know. So
Right.
I just, she's an entity that exists and seems to have it seems to be protective of me in some regard. So yeah, could totally be a spirit guide.
Well, I mean, those are very actually really intense experiences. And speaking of like the electricity stuff, my camera kind of got dark here because the sun went away. But like, I have two lights here, and one of the reasons I started my podcast on Up Again is I kind of had my own depressive kind of episode too. I've gone through a lot of stuff in my life, and I wasn't really doing my podcast anymore, but I had my whole setup going on. And one day my light, just one light, that light right there, started turning on its own completely. I'm like, short circuit, something's going on. And I kept doing it for just weeks, and then it turned into a month. And one day I had an electrician over fixing the stove, and I asked him, hey, can you figure out what's going on with this? And he looked at it, he's like, yeah, there's no reason why it would be turning on by itself. I'm like, huh, weird. And my mom's boyfriend even saw it once turn on its own. When I literally asked it to, I'm like, watch it, it's going to do it, it's going to do it. And then it would do it. And then my sister's boyfriend saw the same thing. And so eventually I just started saying, all right, if there's something here, because I've had a lot of supernatural experiences as well. So I'm always like, there's something always around me going on. Like, if you're an entity or a being, whatever, just turn on the light. And then right when I ask it to, it does it. I'm like, all right, clearly this is something. And I'll be like, all right, do you want me to start the podcast up again? Because it's always shining, on my set here. And I took that as a message. And I'm like, blink once for no, twice for yes. And then it blinked twice, just as I asked. I'm like, there you go. Okay, I'll do it again. I'll start.
You have a ghost cheerleader. I love it.
I guess, yeah, I guess. So I
You've
kind of know what that's.
you've had a near-death experience, haven't you?
Yeah, I've died quite a few times and stuff over and over again.
That's intense.
Probably over a dozen times. I was just telling my last guest, like, I stopped counting just because it happened so much. But it was mostly within a short time period from like 2018 or 2019 to 2021 or 2022. I've been pretty stable since then. But
Good.
yeah, it's like the first time it happened, my heart reached over 300 beats per minute, and they had to completely stop it and reset it and bring me back to life. And it was called supraventricular tachycardia, and I had that a bunch of times. And I actually went, over a week with it being like probably 200 to 300, and then eventually it got to 300. And because my cardiologist, a cardiologist who was not a good cardiologist, told me to not go to the ER. And that's the last time I stopped. I don't listen to doctors blindly ever anymore. Because at one point I was like, I have to go to the emergency room, Mom. I had my Apple Watch. I don't have it on now, but I was doing the EKG on the Apple Watch. I'm like, it's 300 beats per minute. And yeah, it feels like you're getting hit by a train when they shut your heart off from 300 to 0. It is pretty crazy. And that was just the first time. So I started going other times when it would reach, around 200. It would kind of escalate quicker and quicker every time after that. And every time it's just kind of like getting hit by a train.
So they literally have to reset your heart every time?
Yeah.
Wow.
But I wasn't dead like minutes. I was dead like, maybe 30 seconds max, or probably less, a little less than that. So it wasn't that long.
Do you remember anything from the other side?
I think it was too quick to have that kind of like full experience of people seeing the gates of heaven and stuff and all that stuff, or being in hell. It was more, I got glimpses of my future, and it kind of seemed like a message of, I'm a pretty rebellious person. Even if a spirit guide or whatever the hell's going on is telling me to do something, I really like doing what I want to do. And I think they had to, whatever's going on, I think I'm here for a very specific reason. And I've had so many experiences now where it's undeniable why I'm here. And I think that was to force me to comply, which is kind of makes me question how the whole system works. But I think I'm here for a very specific purpose, and I'm trying to follow it the best I can. Even though parts of me are kind of like fed up with it, because I learned about, multidimensional experiences and timelines and how everything works and quantum physics. I'm like, can I go to another timeline? Can I do this or that? So, we're all trying to do the best we can, and it's still a mystery. No one knows for sure everything that's going on. But whatever is going on, I'm here, I know, for a specific purpose. So I'm trying to fulfill that purpose. I think part of that purpose is bringing together people who are genuinely good humans with the right intentions, with their own purposes, who I believe are like yourself, who are able to build systems for the future in this new age we're entering into, regardless if this is a simulation or just a spiritual human experience, whatever the nature of reality is. I think we are in a huge transitional, pivotal period that's going to take good people stepping up to the plate. And usually it's I think evil tends to organize very easily. It falls easily. I think when good people finally do get together, but good people usually just want to do their own thing and we're less organized. But I think we're at a point where good people have to start organizing to defeat evil. I genuinely believe both exist. And we know duality exists already, so you need the contrast. But I think it's time good people start stepping up, and I think a lot of us are starting to be kind of pushed and moved in that direction. So I think part of my purpose is to promote and bring together remarkable individuals who are capable of doing great things.
Yeah, I believe that. And I think too, having died multiple times, like that's a scary thing to happen. And I think that the resiliency that you show and especially like having a sense of humor and being able to laugh at so much of this stuff is deeply inspiring to people, And it's like, Michael has shown us what's possible, that you can face some of the worst things in the human experience and you can come out the other side laughing, and like that testament to the rebelliousness of the human spirit. So yeah, that's very cool. And the other thing that's kind of interesting to consider is a lot of people who are intuitive or attuned, which you are, and especially if there's been some kind of near-death experience, we're like bridges. And so what you're talking about like connecting people makes a whole lot of sense to me, that would be part of your mission, to like create bridges in that way. So very cool. I'm excited to be here and connected with you.
Thank you. And honestly, like even if I don't want to do something sometimes, or I'm a little lazy or want to shift to a different timeline where I can just walk and everything works perfectly. Whenever I do start building connections, whether it's like this or in person, especially in person too, just like last Christmas, I dressed up as, I think you read one of my Substack articles where I talked about this. I dressed up as Santa just because I had just the intuition, just a little inkling to do it. And I'm at the point so much where I just listen. I just do whatever my intuition tells me. And when I did that, I bought as many presents as I could dressed as Santa, and I rolled around everywhere for 2 or 3 days, giving out hundreds of dollars worth of presents. And, so many people were taking pictures with me and just saying, man, I'm just having a really shit time. And seeing you roll around doing this, just giving out presents for free. They're like, really, for free? You don't want anything. Some people couldn't believe. It was so sad that some people can't believe that someone would give something away just for free with no strings attached. And mostly older people. Like I had an older couple telling me, like, she said to me, I don't believe you. She's like, who's paying you to do this? Like, you have some company? I'm like, no, I just decided to give presents away for free. She's like, there's no way you just decided to do this. I'm like, I'm sorry, no one's ever shown you this kind of compassion in your life. She's like 70s or 80s. And she's like, well, thank you for doing that. I can't believe you're actually doing it. So it taught me that we all put on a brave face for the public, and we almost have this collective shame we feel for being vulnerable, which I think is a paradigm that definitely needs to shift. And it takes people who have gone through a lot exposing their scars and their vulnerability to show that they can actually be beautiful and they can build bridges, and there's just a better way to do things. It doesn't have to be shit all the time. It doesn't have to be this way. It can be a world that's full of love and harmony is possible. It just takes a different choice, a different mentality, a different culture, really. It's all about culture. Like I hear, when this whole thing about TikTok being banned started to happen, people started posting their experiences from other countries. I think it's called World Talk, right? And they're talking about China and all this stuff, and how we're programmed to believe it's just absolute, terrible shit over there. And America is the best. And you learn about Japan and cultures like that, and how in Japan you can leave stuff out in the street and no one will steal anything. It's completely like safe. And I just think we need to build a culture that isn't built on tearing each other down and built off pure competition, and instead built off of cooperation. And that's I think, communism is bad because that's putting the needs of the many over the needs of the few. I think a better way to do it is empower all individuals to be their best self. And that way everyone's raised up and the
Mhm.
bar is raised for everyone instead of putting the needs of, right now in America, it's like the needs of the few outweigh the needs of the many. Not good.
Mhm.
In communism, it's like the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Not good. Both extremes. But if you make a level playing field for everyone and champion everyone's individual strengths, because we're all born with special gifts and talents we need to display to the world, that raises everyone up. So I just think that mentality needs to be spread. And I think people like you are building those platforms for it to take place. And like you say, a lot of startups, sometimes they're not successful. There's a lot of variabilities. But I believe that this is a time, I do believe there are, and you, like you say with yourself and your spiritual experiences, there are forces at play that want good people to win, I think, especially during this pivotal time. So I have a lot of confidence that people like you building these systems, even if this one doesn't work out, it'll probably lead to something better. But I hope this one does work out, you know. So I appreciate you doing everything you're doing as well.
And likewise, fulfilling the our respective missions, even when it's kind of tough, and even when you kind of. I think it's funny. At some point, you said that when you feel like you're getting directions from a spirit guide or whatever, and you're a little bit rebellious about it, totally relatable. I'm like, don't tell me what to do. I'm trapped
Hmm.
down here in the meat suit with these 5D or with these 3D senses, and like you're gonna be up there where it's nice and blissful, telling me how to do this. Like, I don't think so, ma'am, sir, whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
I'll just say fuck off all the time to like
Me
just the
too.
air. I'm just like fuck off.
Yep.
You know, but we all, even if that wasn't happening, I'm sure you would feel the same way where it's like you're just internal moral compass. There's something inside of you that you're compelled to just do the right thing.
Hmm.
Do you feel that way?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like,
And I think that and that's like earlier you had asked me a question about like being burned in business, right? And I think that that's for kind of a lot of us who have that internal compass as strongly as we do. It's sometimes unnerving to realize that the rest of the world isn't like that, right? And
mhm,
often have to learn through being mistreated, being exploited, being betrayed. It's like, oh, that's actually how a lot of the world apparently operates, that old world paradigm. And like, how do you protect yourself from that? How do you understand the game without playing it the same way? So,
mhm.
relatable.
I agree. Yeah, part of self love is being able to have those boundaries where you protect yourself, but also keep your moral compass straight and you still do the right thing, but you know that you're also doing the right thing for yourself
Hmm.
and those around you, right? So, yeah, I
Yeah.
agree with that. What is the schedule for TAO Social's release? How can everybody follow along? And what are the best places for people to follow you?
So the best place to follow along is going to be our newsletter. That's on Beehive, and the links are all over my link tree. My personal social is at Human Experienced on TikTok. That's kind of the largest platform that we have. And then I've also got at By Clearlight Studios or TAO Social on TikTok is also an account that was intended to be for our team to also post, but apparently they're a little bit camera shy, so I haven't succeeded in getting anyone to put up any videos, but I'm trying. And we're also on YouTube, Clearlight Studios, and I should probably change that to TAO Social. Just to clarify, the reason for that is that we didn't have a name for a while. And my agency, my consultancy is Clearlight Studios. And so it was like the app by Clearlight Studios for the time. And now we have the name that is TAO Social together as one. So the newsletter, our Substack, TikTok is really where we are right now. And we just started on Blue Sky.
And then where do people vote on stuff? Is that in the Reddit or is that like a Discord kind of thing?
That's been very general right now. At some point,
Okay.
oh, and then the other question was the timeline for TAO, which we'll also talk about. But the voting right now is done in like a Google survey or Google Forms. Just when something comes up, it will be more sophisticated down the road when we actually have like the DAO structure built out. So right now, and the best way to see that is I'll occasionally post videos when we have something to vote on, but it always goes out in the newsletter. So the newsletter is like our single source of truth. It's also what we're going to use for crowdfunding. So highly recommend that people sign up there. As for the timeline, we are slated for a closed beta in April. We were hoping to make it open, but These are a bunch of people with like families and kids and full-time jobs that are working after hours. And so we're looking at a closed beta in April, open beta probably in May is what it's going to end up being. And it'll be invite only, but we will gradually open it up. We want to make sure that it's in a good place before we go into crowdfunding, because probably needs to be more of an MLP, a minimum lovable product, as opposed to a minimum viable product. And it needs to be something compelling enough that people are going to want to do the crowdfunding, because we're not going to traditional investors. There's not going to be any angel investors, venture capital, family offices. None of that is going to be by the people, for the people, with the people, which means 100% grassroots and crowdfunded.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Chiara, for joining me and everything you've been doing. I think you're making a big impact, and go follow everyone, and also follow me if you want to read some of my articles like we were talking about on my Substack. It's called Reading My Writing with Michael the Chairman. And I'm still working on my third one. It has to do with creation and our natural need to create and things like that. I wrote it all, and I know people have been asking me when it's going to release. I keep changing my perspective so much that I completely look back at it now. I'm like, I've changed my views already in like a month. So I'm going to probably, I'll try and release that one sometime soon. But thanks for all the support, everyone. And thank you, Chiara, again for joining me. And I'll see you in the next episode.